It happened in an instant, sharp as a blade. Mark Levin leaned forward, voice dripping with disdain, and spat out the words like they were designed to wound. A law degree from you. Please. That's barely worth the paper it's printed on. The insult landed like a grenade in the room. For a moment, silence reigned. Studio lights burned hot above the set, casting hard shadows on the faces of those frozen in disbelief. The audience seemed suspended in time, as if the air itself had thickened. A few muffled gasps escaped. Then a low murmur rippled through the crowd. Levin sat back satisfied, wearing that familiar smirk of a man who believed he had already won. But the weight of his words hung heavier than he imagined. They weren't just an attack on Jasmine Crockett's credentials. They were an attack on every immigrant who struggled for recognition, every woman who clawed her way through barriers, every voice dismissed before it could even be heard. Levin's dismissal echoed like a door slammed shut in the face of dignity itself. Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't rush to fill the silence. She let it hang, let the arrogance linger in the air long enough for everyone watching to taste its bitterness. The tension became unbearable, a pressure cooker threatening to explode. The cameras zoomed in on her face. Calm, unreadable eyes, steady, lips pressed in quiet restraint. Viewers across the country leaned closer to their screens. They knew what Levin expected: fluster, anger, retreat. But there was none of that. Instead, there was a storm gathering behind her composure, the kind of energy that comes from years of having to prove, to endure, to rise above. The studio audience shifted in their seats. Whispers grew louder, mixing with nervous laughter. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others crossed their arms, waiting to see if she would crumble under the weight of condescension. Levin's smirk widened, certain he had cornered his opponent. But as the seconds ticked by, that certainty began to tremble. Something was building, something he could not yet see. And then, in that thick, electric silence, it became clear Jasmine Crockett was not about to play his game. She was about to change it. But nobody in that room, not even Levin himself, could have predicted what Jasmine Crockett would do next. This wasn't just another televised exchange. It wasn't just one more insult hurled in a political shouting match. The moment Levin sneered at Jasmine Crockett's law degree, the air shifted, and the weight of history settled on the stage. What unfolded was larger than two people. It was the embodiment of two Americas colliding head-on. On one side sat Mark Levin, a veteran of political talk shows, armed with decades of bluster and the confidence of a man used to dominating conversations. He represented the entrenched powers, the voices who believed volume and arrogance were enough to drown out reason. His smirk was more than personal satisfaction. It was the smirk of an establishment certain it could silence fresh, challenging voices before they even had the chance to rise. On the other side stood Jasmine Crockett, young but unshakable, carrying the weight of something far greater than herself. To Levin, she was just another target. To the millions watching, she was a reflection of their own struggles. The immigrant who worked twice as hard, the student who clawed through doubt, the woman who refused to be dismissed in rooms where respect was rationed. She wasn't simply defending her degree, she was defending the very idea that every barrier overcome deserves recognition, not ridicule. The audience could feel it. Whispers turned into restless energy. A few leaned toward Levin, eager for more of his usual theater, but far more leaned toward Crockett, silently rooting for her to answer in a way that couldn't be ignored. The tension was palpable, the kind of moment that makes headlines, the kind of clip that spreads like wildfire across social media before the commercial break even ends. Producers in the control room scrambled, sensing they were capturing something explosive. Journalists already began drafting notes in the corners of their notepads. They had all seen countless political skirmishes, but this one was different. It wasn't partisan bickering. It wasn't noise. It was about respect itself. Because Levin's insult had done more than challenge Crockett. It had stripped bare a dynamic as old as American power. Established voices mocking the legitimacy of newcomers, gatekeepers sneering at the doors others had to break down. And in that single insult, he revealed not just his disdain for her, but his fear of what she represented. A rising truth he could no longer control. The clash mattered because Crockett wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for every person who'd been told they weren't enough. For every immigrant who had been told their accent made them less American. For every woman who had been told their education wasn't as valuable. For every young voice who'd been mocked as inexperienced. While carrying the wisdom of lived struggle, the studio lights glared brighter. Cameras panned tighter. The stakes could not have been higher, because this was more than a debate, it was a test of dignity. Would arrogance triumph once again, sweeping another new voice aside? Or would dignity, quiet and steady, stand its ground and remind the country that credentials and truth are not given by the powerful, but earned by the perseverant? Every eye was fixed on the stage. Every viewer at home felt the question rising in their own chest. And as Levin settled back in his chair, convinced of his dominance, he had no idea that the ground beneath him was already beginning to shift. This was no ordinary debate. This was about respect itself. And respect, as Levin was about to discover, has a way of humbling those who believe they can mock it with impunity. Mark Levin had built an empire out of outrage. For decades, his voice had thundered through radios and television sets across the country, a mix of venom, sarcasm, and theatrical certainty. To his followers, he was a prophet of conservative anger, sharp, unyielding, unafraid to insult anyone who dared to challenge him. To his critics, he was something else entirely, a man who mistook arrogance for intellect, who relied not on persuasion but on ridicule, who had perfected the art of dismissing opponents with a sneer instead of an argument. Levin's style was no accident. From the beginning of his career, he thrived on confrontation. He would interrupt guests, mock their intelligence, and laugh at their credentials as if scorn itself was proof of his superiority. When others tried to reason with him, he would raise his voice, cut them off, or twist their words until they became unrecognizable. His debates weren't about truth, they were about dominance. He didn't want to win arguments. He wanted to crush people. There were countless moments etched into political memory. He once ridiculed a young activist for mispronouncing a legal term, turning a slip of the tongue into a full-blown tirade about how uneducated the left really is. On another occasion, he dismissed a decorated veteran's critique of foreign policy by mocking his military service, sneering, "If that's what passes for expertise, then no wonder we lose wars." Audiences gasped. Critics fumed, but Levin thrived on the shock. For him, humiliation was sport. Each insult fed his brand. Each verbal takedown added to his reputation as a bulldog unwilling to give even an inch. His fans adored it. They tuned in precisely because he played the villain with relish. They didn't want polite debate. They wanted blood, and Levin delivered, night after night. But arrogance always comes with blind spots. Behind the fire and fury was a man increasingly disconnected from the dignity he claimed to defend. His obsession with belittling others left him incapable of seeing when the tide was turning. Where others saw the new generation rising, diverse, articulate, unafraid, Levin saw only targets, people to be mocked until they retreated. He didn't realize that every insult he hurled no longer cowed audiences the way it once did. Instead, it revealed something brittle about him, that his strength depended on tearing others down, not lifting himself up. The cracks had been showing for years. When challenged by calm, measured opponents, Levin often stumbled. He would grow louder, faster, his face reddening as he struggled to maintain control. His insults, once sharp, now sometimes fell flat, sounding more like desperation than wit. Clips of these moments circulated online. Younger viewers laughed at his overreactions, turning his outbursts into memes. The very style that made him powerful in one era was making him look out of touch in another. Still, Levin couldn't change. Pride had locked him in. To admit fault, to show humility, to recognize dignity in those he mocked. That would unravel the entire persona he had spent decades crafting. And so, even as the audience shifted and culture moved forward, he doubled down. He became louder, more cutting, more reckless with his words. To him, insults were not a weakness, they were proof of dominance. Which is why, on that fateful night, he believed mocking Jasmine Crockett's law degree would be yet another trophy on his shelf. He thought the line would humiliate her, silence her, and remind viewers of his unshakable authority. What he didn't see was how badly the tactic had aged. What he didn't understand was how much the country had changed. How much people were craving authenticity, calm, and dignity over shouting matches and sneers. The insult he launched so casually wasn't just another jab. It was a mirror reflecting his own decline. His reliance on mockery had left him predictable, transparent, vulnerable. Every smirk, every roll of the eyes, every dismissive laugh revealed not strength, but fear of losing control, fear of becoming irrelevant in a world no longer impressed by bluster. Levin had always mistaken arrogance for invincibility. But arrogance, history shows, always sets the stage for its own downfall. And in Jasmine Crockett, he was about to face the one opponent his style was least prepared for, someone who refused to be rattled. Someone who could take his insult and transform it into a weapon far sharper than anything he had ever unleashed. Long before Jasmine Crockett sat under the glare of studio lights, facing down Mark Levin's sneer, she had walked a path paved with struggle, sacrifice, and resilience. Her story wasn't one of privilege or shortcuts. It was one of grit, of late nights spent buried in law books, of relentless battles to prove she belonged in rooms that weren't designed for her presence. From the very beginning, Crockett knew the odds. She came from a world where doubters circled like vultures, waiting for her to stumble. Teachers, classmates, even mentors sometimes carried that subtle edge of skepticism, the look that suggested, "Are you really cut out for this?" She wasn't handed confidence, she had to carve it from stone. Law school was not a gentle ascent. It was a crucible. She juggled grueling coursework with jobs that paid the bills, often studying until dawn and waking up with just enough time to repeat the cycle. While others coasted on networks of family connections, Crockett built her foundation brick by brick, held together by determination. Every time someone dismissed her, every time she was underestimated, she found fuel. But it wasn't only academics. It was the weight of identity. Walking into classrooms where few faces looked like hers, where women of color were often treated as outsiders, Crockett had to master not only the law, but the art of resilience. She endured the sly comments, the raised eyebrows, the professors who graded her more harshly not out of fairness, but out of doubt. She fought through it all, carrying herself with a dignity that couldn't be shaken. The sacrifices were immense. Friends enjoyed weekends while she pored over case law. Family gatherings often saw her absent, too busy chasing deadlines to save her rest. The toll was personal, emotional, but necessary. She knew what she was fighting for wasn't just her own success. It was a seat at the table for everyone who had been told they didn't belong. And when she earned that law degree, it wasn't a piece of paper. It was a victory etched in sweat and perseverance. It was a statement, I belong here, and nothing you say can take that away. That degree carried with it every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every obstacle overcome. Her journey into public life only sharpened her. In the courtroom, she wasn't just another attorney reciting statutes. She was a fighter, an advocate for those who couldn't afford the luxury of power. She defended the marginalized, the overlooked, the silenced. Each case reminded her that the law was more than theory. It was a lifeline, and too often it was a lifeline denied to those who needed it most. It was in these battles that Crockett developed her trademark composure. While opponents barked and blustered, she learned to stay steady, to let arrogance collapse under its own weight. Her wit became sharp not from cruelty but from necessity. Her calm became a weapon. She knew that silence, when wielded with intent, could be louder than any shout. To her supporters, she became more than a lawyer. She became a symbol of persistence, someone who carried the hopes of those who saw themselves reflected in her journey. To her critics, she was a thorn, a reminder that the old ways of silencing new voices were dying. By the time she entered the political arena, Crockett was already battle-tested. She had faced dismissive professors, skeptical colleagues, and the crushing weight of expectation. Each challenge prepared her for moments like the one she now faced with Levin. He saw only a degree he could mock. She saw a lifetime of struggle embodied in that degree, a story of resilience he could never comprehend. Because this was not just about a diploma framed on a wall. It was about what that diploma represented: a refusal to be defined by doubt, a triumph over those who tried to close doors, a victory for every person who had to fight harder simply to stand where others strolled freely. It was about dignity earned, not granted. And so, when Levin hurled his insult, dismissing all of it with a single smirk, Crockett didn't see merely a personal slight. She saw the sneer that had followed her, and so many others like her. Every step of the way, she saw every teacher who had underestimated her, every colleague who had mocked her, every barrier erected to keep her out. Her silence in that moment wasn't hesitation. It was power coiling, ready to strike. She had been preparing her entire life for moments like this, where arrogance tried to erase dignity, and where dignity had the chance to stand taller than ever. This was not just about a degree. It was about everything she had fought for, and when the moment came, she was more than ready. The silence that followed Levin's insult was short-lived. Sensing the crowd's unease, he leaned in again, his voice rising, eyes flashing with that practiced mix of indignation and scorn. "You can wave that degree around all you want, Congresswoman, but it doesn't make you smarter. It doesn't make you credible. It certainly doesn't make you someone the rest of us should take seriously." The words came sharper, louder, meant to bury her beneath their weight. Levin was no stranger to this tactic: overwhelm, outpace, outshout. He had made a career out of doubling down when others expected him to relent. The louder he grew, the more he believed the audience would fall in line, cowed by his bluster. But Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't rush to interrupt or match his volume. She let him unravel, each sentence digging his hole deeper, each flash of anger exposing the desperation beneath his certainty. Her face remained steady, her body language deliberate. She tilted her head slightly, as though studying him, as though measuring just how far he would go. The contrast was striking. Levin's voice filled the room with fire, but Crockett's silence filled it with anticipation. Every pause she allowed him became louder than his tirades. It was the silence of restraint, of a storm waiting for the right moment to break. The audience felt the tension growing. Murmurs spread like wildfire, low rumbles of discomfort mixed with gasps at Levin's brazen arrogance. Some exchanged glances, eyebrows raised in disbelief at the venom pouring from his mouth. Others leaned forward in their seats, waiting, hoping for Crockett to finally unleash the words they knew she was holding back. Levin mistook their anticipation for approval. He smiled through his fury, punctuating his insults with sweeping gestures, hands slicing through the air. This is exactly what's wrong with the so-called new generation. You think credentials mean wisdom. You think a law degree makes you untouchable. Let me tell you something, it doesn't. You don't intimidate me. You don't impress me. You're nothing more than a pretender with a shiny piece of paper. Gasps broke out. A few audibly groaned. Somewhere in the back of the room, a single clap of protest echoed, quickly stifled by the tension. Cameras caught the flickers of discomfort spreading across faces in the audience. Levin thought he was controlling the room. In reality, he was losing it. And still, Crockett sat, calm and deliberate. She didn't interrupt. She didn't protest. She simply listened, her silence becoming a mirror that reflected Levin's rage back at him. Each insult seemed smaller against her composure. Each attack seemed less powerful when it failed to move her. Her eyes stayed locked on him, unwavering. Not defensive, not wounded, but steady, almost amused. As if she knew something he didn't. As if she held a card he hadn't realized existed. The kind of card that could change the entire game in a single move. The murmurs in the audience swelled. People could feel it now, the imbalance, the impending shift. Levin's dominance was slipping. The louder he became, the more transparent his weakness looked. The calmer she remained, the stronger she appeared. It was a battle of noise versus silence, and silence was winning. Levin, blinded by his own momentum, didn't notice. He kept pressing, his tone dripping with disdain, hammering the same insult in new ways. A degree doesn't make you qualified. A degree doesn't make you respected. And if you think it does, then maybe you're even more naive than I thought. The words hung in the air like a dare. The crowd leaned in, waiting for the inevitable. They knew she wouldn't stay silent forever. They knew her composure wasn't weakness. It was calculation. Everyone could sense she was about to strike, but no one knew how. For a long moment, Jasmine Crockett let Levin's words linger in the air. She sat back in her chair, hands folded, gaze unwavering. The cameras caught the stillness, the calm before a storm no one else could yet see. Levin smirked, mistaking her silence for surrender. He had grown used to that reaction, opponents wilting under his barrage, forced into stammering defenses. He thought he had cornered her. But Crockett's pause wasn't weakness. It was precision. She knew the value of timing, the way silence could sharpen a response into something unforgettable. And when she finally leaned forward, her voice was steady, measured, each syllable like a hammer driving nails into the coffin of Levin's arrogance. "Mr. Levin," she began, raising an eyebrow ever so slightly, "you seem awfully invested in belittling my law degree. So let's talk about it." The audience leaned closer. Her tone wasn't defensive, it was deliberate, confident. The cadence of someone who had waited for exactly this opening. "You see, when I earned that degree, it wasn't handed to me because of a name, or because I yelled louder than my classmates. It wasn't the result of privilege or shortcuts. It was years of sacrifice. Nights working jobs just to pay tuition, mornings where I barely slept but still showed up, prepared, determined, and unwilling to quit. That degree represents struggle, it represents resilience. It represents a fight to be heard in rooms where people like you have spent years trying to talk over us." A ripple of applause burst from the crowd, short and sharp, quickly stifled as people realized she wasn't finished. Levin shifted uncomfortably, his smirk faltering, but he forced it back, as if clinging to it could hold off what was coming. Crockett leaned in further. "And let's be honest, sir. If you truly believed a degree didn't matter, you wouldn't spend so much energy mocking mine. You wouldn't feel so threatened by the fact that someone who looks like me, who comes from where I come from, earned the same right to practice law as anyone else. Your problem isn't with my credentials. Your problem is with what they represent." The audience erupted again. Louder this time, cheers and claps breaking through the tension. Levin raised his hand as if to interject, but Crockett's voice cut clean through the noise, commanding the room without ever rising in volume. "Because what they represent, Mr. Levin, is a truth you can't shout over, that dignity doesn't need your permission. That respect isn't granted by people in power. It's earned by those who refuse to back down. And if my law degree bothers you this much, then maybe the problem isn't my education. Maybe the problem is your insecurity." Gasps, then thunderous applause. Some in the audience shot to their feet, clapping, nodding, calling out in agreement. Cameras caught Levin's face tightening, his usual composure cracking as he shuffled in his chair. His eyes darted to the moderator, to the audience, to Crockett herself, searching for control that had slipped through his fingers. But Crockett wasn't finished. She paused, allowing the noise to crest, then held up a hand, calming the crowd. The silence returned, sharper than before. She chose her next words with surgical precision. I didn't come here to trade insults. I came here to have a conversation about the future of this country. But when you reduced it to mocking a degree, you revealed more about yourself than about me. You revealed that when faced with substance, you retreat to scorn, and you revealed that the loudest voice in the room is often the weakest argument. The room shook with applause. This wasn't just rebuttal. It was dismantling. Piece by piece, she was tearing down Levin's edifice of arrogance, brick by brick exposing the hollowness beneath it. Levin tried to recover. His lips parted, but the words faltered. For the first time, his trademark bluster seemed small, out of place, even pitiful against the force of Crockett's poise. He adjusted his glasses, forced a chuckle, muttered something about emotional overreaction, but it was too late. The tide had turned, and everyone knew it, and Crockett pressed the advantage. You can laugh, you can sneer. You can keep pretending that shouting makes you right. But here's the truth: people are tired of arrogance. They're tired of being told their hard work doesn't count, that their sacrifices don't matter, that their voices should be dismissed. My degree isn't just a credential. It's a symbol of every barrier broken, every doubt overcome. And if you think you can erase that with a smirk, then you haven't been paying attention to where this country is headed. The crowd roared, standing now, clapping, whistling. Phones lit up across the room, audience members recording, posting, hashtags already being typed in real time. Twitter feeds began to flood. TikTok edits would be online before the show even ended. This was no longer a debate. It was a moment, the kind that burns into collective memory. Levin's face reddened. He adjusted his tie, shifted his papers, searching for footing. But every move betrayed what the audience already sensed. He had been dismantled, exposed, reduced to silence by the very calm he thought he could break. His confidence evaporated before millions of eyes. Crockett, meanwhile, didn't gloat. She didn't smirk or bask. She simply leaned back, composed, steady, as the audience's cheers washed over her. It wasn't triumph for her. It was truth. It was dignity asserting itself against arrogance and winning. The moderator struggled to regain control, calling for order. But the moment had already escaped the stage. It belonged now to the audience, to the millions watching at home, to the countless people replaying Crockett's words on their screens, sharing them, celebrating them. Mark Levin had built a career on bluster. But in less than 5 minutes, Jasmine Crockett had stripped it down to rubble with nothing more than calm, clarity, and conviction. And the ripple effect of this moment would spread far beyond that room. The debate hadn't even ended when the digital earthquake began. Phones lit up across the auditorium, and within minutes, Crockett's words were clipped, captioned, and unleashed into the wild of the internet. Twitter feeds exploded, hashtags surged, fair respect the degree, fake Crockett clapback, comic drop justice, all rocketing into the top trends. One clip of her raising that single eyebrow before speaking was looped endlessly, set to dramatic music, stitched into TikToks with captions like, "This is how you silence arrogance." Headlines formed in real time, moving faster than producers could type them. Crockett dismantles Levin in viral exchange. Law degree mocked, but Crockett fires back with precision. The moment respect won. On cable panels, anchors tried to hold back smiles as they replayed the exchange on loop, each time pausing to marvel at her poise, her command, her unshakable calm. By dawn the next morning, the shockwaves had become a cultural tidal wave. Celebrities chimed in. One popular actor tweeted, "Watching Crockett handle Levin is like watching Ali in the ring. Float, sting, win." A Grammy-winning musician reposted the clip with the caption, "This is how you fight ignorance with dignity." Civil rights leaders praised her as a model for a new generation of leaders who understood that authenticity was a weapon more powerful than arrogance. Levin, meanwhile, became the internet's newest punchline. Memes spread like wildfire. His smirk side by side with his stunned expression moments later, captioned, "Expectation vs. Reality." Another showed his flustered hand gestures labeled, "When you realize you just lost the argument to receipts, not volume." TikTok creators reenacted the moment, dramatizing Levin's mockery only to collapse in mock defeat when they played Crockett's rebuttal. In the digital coliseum of public opinion, the verdict was swift and merciless. But beyond the laughs, there was something deeper. For young viewers, especially students, immigrants, and professionals often dismissed for their accents, their gender, or their skin color, Crockett's stand felt personal. Comment sections filled with testimonies. "She spoke for me tonight. This is why we keep pushing. No matter who tries to belittle us, my degree is more than paper too." It wasn't just validation, it was vindication. Levin's defenders scrambled to spin. Some claimed he had been taken out of context. Others said the reaction was overblown. But the momentum was unstoppable. Every attempt to minimize the moment only amplified it. because this wasn't about a single insult anymore. It had become a symbol, the collision of arrogance with dignity and the triumph of dignity. By the second day, late-night hosts joined the chorus, playing the clip to roaring studio audiences. One joked, Levin walked into that debate like a lion and left like a house cat that just saw the vacuum cleaner. Laughter rang coast to coast, and yet, in the midst of the viral frenzy, Crockett herself remained strikingly grounded. While pundits framed it as a victory, she downplayed the drama in interviews. This was never about shutting someone down, she told one network, her voice steady, resolute. It was about standing up for respect, for everyone who has ever worked hard for something only to be told it wasn't enough. That refusal to gloat only deepened the respect she earned. Commentators noted how she turned what could have been a fleeting internet sensation into a moment of principle. Instead of celebrating the humiliation of her opponent, she elevated the conversation, reminding people that dignity wasn't about one battle. It was about the larger fight for recognition and equality. And that's when the story shifted again. What began as a viral clapback transformed into something far greater. Headlines morphed from Crockett shreds Levin to Crockett redefines respect in politics. She wasn't just the woman who silenced Levin. She was becoming a voice for everyone tired of being diminished. But Crockett herself refused to make it about victory. Instead, she turned it into something far greater. When the clamor of headlines and the roar of social media began to settle, something remarkable emerged. The night was no longer remembered simply as the time Levin insulted Crockett's law degree. It had become a parable. A story replayed in homes, classrooms, and offices as a lesson about what truly matters when arrogance collides with dignity. Crockett herself crystallized the moment. In a follow-up interview, when asked how it felt to have defeated Levin, she shook her head gently, almost dismissing the question. This was never about defeating anyone, she said with quiet power. It was about reminding people that dignity will always speak louder than arrogance. Knowledge is not about volume. It's about truth, and truth doesn't shout, it stands. Those words reframed everything. The insult once stinging now looked small, even childish. Levin's arrogance seemed like a loud clatter of cymbals fading into silence, while Crockett's calm stood like a bell that kept ringing. She transformed the spectacle into a moral lesson. Respect isn't granted by titles or self-proclaimed authority. It's earned by truth, by struggle, by authenticity that cannot be shaken. And that message began to resonate far beyond the arena of politics. Teachers shared the clip with students, reminding them that their work mattered, even when dismissed by others. Immigrant parents pointed to Crockett's response as proof that dignity comes from perseverance, not permission. Young women in law schools and debate clubs replayed her words, whispering to themselves, "This is how I will carry myself." The universal moral was clear. Arrogance may roar, but it crumbles under the weight of truth. Dismissiveness can belittle, but it cannot erase lived struggle. And while pride puffs itself up with noise, dignity endures in silence, until it speaks, and the world must listen. Crockett's story had now become everyone's story. The worker overlooked by his boss. The student mocked for her accent. The activist told his dream was unrealistic. Each of them saw a reflection of themselves in her calm defiance. They felt, even if for a moment, that their own fight for respect was validated, their own worth undeniable. By the time the dust settled, Crockett was no longer just a rising voice in politics. She was a symbol, proof that dignity, when paired with courage, could pierce through arrogance like sunlight cutting fog. The lesson she embodied was timeless. Truth may be doubted, mocked, or minimized, but it cannot be defeated. And so, the moral of that rang clear: arrogance crumbles, dignity endures. It was not merely about a law degree. It was about every hard-earned victory, every quiet sacrifice, every truth forged in struggle. It was about the unshakable fact that respect is never handed down by the arrogant. It is claimed by those who have lived, fought, and endured. The audience, both in the room and across the world, was left not just entertained but inspired, uplifted, proud, and reminded of something deeply human. When dignity rises, arrogance falls. In the end, the story wrote itself. Levin tried to humiliate Jasmine Crockett. He tried to reduce her years of sacrifice, study, and grit into a punchline. But humiliation has a way of boomeranging, and that night it circled back on him. His insult, meant to diminish, became the very moment that exposed the emptiness of arrogance. The audience saw it. America saw it. Because what Crockett revealed wasn't just quick wit or sharp rebuttal. It was composure. It was strength rooted not in noise but in truth. And in that truth, people found themselves, their struggles, their sacrifices, their quiet resilience. The headlines captured the clash. The hashtags captured the moment. But what lingered was something deeper. Dignity had won. And maybe that's the takeaway for all of us. No matter how loud arrogance gets, no matter how cruel dismissiveness feels, There is a power in meeting it with dignity. It doesn't just silence the arrogance, it transforms the room. Crockett didn't just defend her law degree. She defended the worth of every person who has ever been told they're not enough. So here's where you come in. If this moment spoke to you, if it reminded you of the strength in standing tall, then join us in amplifying it. Subscribe, join the movement where dignity always wins. Share if this moment inspired you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment, tell us what dignity means to you. Because this was never just about one debate. It was about a lesson for us all. Arrogance fades, but dignity endures.